Hey, Randy Joe here, and welcome back to the channel, where if you've been following along, you would have seen for quite some time now, we have been reacting to the entirety of the Kate Bush discography, kicking it off with, of course, the kick inside, no pun intended. And today, after much anticipation, I know many people in the comments have been waiting for a video such as this one, where I am going to rank and tier out the entire Kate Bush discography, starting of course with the kick inside, all the way to her final album, 50 Words for Snow. And I know I did mention in a couple of past videos, as well as in some of the comments, that I was thinking about doing an entire stream, a live stream, where I would kind of focus on Kate Bush's discography and kind of her music videos and a plethora of other things related to Kate Bush. But I decided not to go all the way with that, as I do not have the proper equipment for streaming at the moment, and it is just not on my docket right now to get to, because I do have a bunch of other videos I would like to do first. However, if I ever do start live streaming on this channel, which I would like to at some point, but if I do, I will certainly keep the Kate Bush stream on the back burner, and it's something that maybe I will do at a later date when we revisit her. But with that being said, this will most likely be the last Kate Bush video on my channel for a good chunk of time. But without further ado, let's get into the tier list today, kicking it off with her debut album, The Kick Inside. Here we are with The Kick Inside, her debut project. And I've got to say, for a debut album, this album is pretty impeccable. Not just for Kate Bush, this is not just one of her most solid albums all around, but this is an incredible album. I would say for any artist, this would be a high for many artists, because this thing to me is like a solid 8 out of 10. You know, there's not a lot of weaknesses going into it. It does contain her massive breakout single, Wuthering Heights, where we see Kate adapt the classic novel Wuthering Heights into her own sort of concept on that track. But aside from even that incredible breakout hit where we see her kind of pitch her iconic schoolgirl voice, as people call it, you also have tracks like The Man with the Child in His Eyes, as well as James and the Cold Gun. Incredible tracks that I believe, you know, the sequencing, Wuthering Heights, is sandwiched right in between the two, making for a really great 3-track run right in the middle of the LP. And you also have Moving, which kicks off the LP quite strongly as a tribute to one of Kate Bush's many mentors throughout her life, as well as Them Heavy People on here, I think, is really catchy. And of course the title track to close things out, really showing Kate Bush is not afraid to go into territories that were very taboo, especially at the time. Again, she made this when she was about 18 years old. I think she was around that age at least, and wrote most of these songs as a teenager, which only further, you know, kind of feels impressive when you really think about it. But even though, again, this is not her best project, this is an incredible debut album, and for many artists, this would certainly be their best project, I would say. So with that in mind, this is going to be a solid A tier. Let's throw it up here, right there. A tier record. And again, just to quickly kind of summarize, you know, if it gets C tier, it's like a 5 out of 10. It's a fairly, you know, kind of middling average record. Anything above a C is obviously more positive. Anything below a C is a negative. So by putting this in A, I am kind of suggesting that this is a solid 8 to 9 out of 10 record. This is a great record, but not a perfect record. That just kind of gives you an idea of how the tier lists, at least in my eyes, sort of work. Let's go into Lionheart, her second LP, the follow-up to Kick Inside, which came out not much longer, I believe 5 or 6 months after the Kick Inside. Now, unfortunately for Lionheart, even though there is some shining moments on this record, this does feel like a Kick Inside kind of leftover record. A lot of the tracks here do feel like they were meant to be on the Kick Inside, or like they are half-baked kind of tracks that couldn't quite make that debut, but were kind of just shoved out on the second release, which does seem to be the case considering her record label was kind of pushing her so hard to release an LP so quickly after the Kick Inside, which resulted in an album that does feel like it does not have as much maturity in her work, as much growth between projects, and in that sense obviously does kind of contribute to the sort of leftovers B-sides of Kick Inside kind of feeling. That being said, there is some great tracks on here. I do think Wow, despite the fact that I did not like it initially, I do really like the track Wow. This also has Symphony in Blue, which kicks off the album. I do think it is quite a beautiful track to kick things off, and does feel a little bit different from the focus of the kick inside. We also got Kashka from Baghdad and Hammer Horror ending the LP, which I think Hammer Horror is probably, in my opinion, the most advanced this record does feel. Kind of shows a direction that is a little bit more bold and unique in tone, while still keeping in the kind of 70s sensibilities that I feel like the Kick Inside and Lionheart both contain. That being said, the majority of this record does feel weaker than the Kick Inside, and to many, this is the worst record of hers. I think a lot of people rank this quite low, and while I don't think this is her worst album, not that any of her albums are bad, to be fair, but this is certainly not one of my favorites. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and we'll throw this, in a solid C to B. It's not a B tier, it's just on the cusp, I would say, of being something special. We'll throw it right here, right in the middle, which makes it a solid, I will say 6 out of 10 or so. Next, her third project, Never Forever. Never Forever, for a while, for a good chunk of time, was my favorite record of hers, or at least my most underrated record of hers. I think this thing is beautiful. I think this kind of kicks off a trilogy of albums to come that are really among her best work. I know people typically consider The Dreaming to be part one of a trilogy, but to me, Never Forever is really the key kind of starter to that kind of concept, where she does kind of push her production into a fresher direction, which is obvious to see why. This is where Kate Bush apparently took over a lot more in terms of kind of the focus and production of her records. The label had less control over the creativity of the record, and it really does show a Kate Bush that is more fearless than ever before, more creative, and certainly pushing boundaries in a way that many artists, barely ever seem to scratch the surface of. And this thing has incredible tracks as well. Delius is fantastic. Babushka kicks this thing off strong. Really great backup vocals too throughout Babushka and the entirety of the project. Army Dreamers, oh my god, Army Dreamers has that incredible sound effect of like the men at kind of like war effect, really adding to the themes of the track. You've got Breathing, which closes out the record in just a beautiful kind of massive sort of way. And certain other tracks too. I think it is, if I'm not mistaken, The Wedding List, where you hear Kate Bush sort of crossing between your very mind with the panning of her footsteps in the middle of the track. Again, production techniques like that, where she is certainly a little bit more bold in her vision, really make this record stand out and feel incredibly strong. Now, of the first 3 records, this to me is where she really starts to show off her best work. She really comes into her own and shows that she is a force to be reckoned with, and one of the most creative and innovative artists at the time, and eventually of all time. So, with that being said, this is a beautiful, gorgeous work. We're going to throw right here. I know you're wondering, why are you throwing that over the Kick Inside? Well, the Kick Inside is going to move over, because Never Forever, to me, is just ever so slightly better. If I'm, yearning for the more 70s kind of style of an album, the production a little bit more vintage in sound, I'll check out the Kick Inside. But if I want something that feels a little bit more kind of boundary pushing, a little bit more unique, and just kind of bold in its focus, but still quite accessible, I'll go Never Forever. So that's how I stand on that. Next, we got the big one. The big, crazy, bold, inventive, wild, unique, innovative adjectives. The Dreaming is this one here. Wow. We are on album 4, and this thing is insane. I'm speechless just thinking about this record still. There are so many ideas on this thing that are just mind-boggling. I still think about the fact that on the track Houdini, which is one of my favorites on this album, she drank milk and ate a good amount of chocolate to create a very sort of phlegmy vocal inflection on the track. It feels disgusting when you hear it and you're like, man, this thing feels like she's like spitting on the mic. Well, it makes sense. She was full of dairy and chocolate, which really added to the track, sonically. Again, very weird experimental kind of just technique she took to make this record. It's not even just that the sound itself is experimental. It's that Kate Bush herself is experimenting with what you can do as an artist to create unique sounds, such as that milk and chocolate combo. But you've got Suspended in Gaffa, you've got Pull Out the Pin, you've got Sat in Your Lap kicking it off, and you've got The Dreaming, the title track. Honestly, this entire record is absolutely incredible. It is breathtaking. It is one of the most groundbreaking records I think you can pick of the 80s at the very least. And while it is not my favorite Kate Bush record, and it is not, in my opinion, the best Kate Bush record, it is definitely, I would say, the most innovative and the most experimental of all her work. And while it's not for everybody, for somebody who is into kind of weird artsy music, such as myself and many Kate Bush fans are, The Dreaming, you can't really get more artsy than that. I feel like this is the peak of creativity in a lot of ways. And while it is not, again, it does miss some of the accessibility of some of her other records, it is quite impeccable and mind-boggling how good this thing is, which is why I'm throwing it up in S tier. You really cannot find many records in the 80s that push the boundaries as much as this one and really do kind of challenge the form of music as an art form. And next we're going to go into her fifth project, and that of course is Hounds of Love. If The Dreaming is the ugly kind of record of Kate Bush's, the ugly innovative record, I would say, where she kind of explores the concept of kind of disgust and brutality and ugliness, I would say, in a music form, Hounds of Love is kind of like that same idea, but instead the opposite factor. Instead of exploring the ugly and the bold, she is kind of exploring a sense of comfort and beauty on Hounds of Love. This record is absolutely, positively one of the most beautifully produced records I have ever heard, and I have listened to some gorgeous records, but this thing, to me, feels like an incredibly unique and innovative record in the field of dream pop. I feel like this kind of leads into a lot of techniques that a lot of artists would venture into in the 90s, and even to this very day, people are still making records with the same kind of ethereal, gorgeous, kind of lavish textures that I feel like Hounds of Love was really pioneering. Now, I wouldn't say this necessarily is the birthplace of those sounds and concepts, but this is certainly one of many pioneering records. The title track, Hounds of Love, really uses a great use of samples to kind of kick things off, which I think kind of adds to a certain vision to the record. You've got Cloud Busting and The Big Sky, which both feel very triumphant and massive in their sound, especially as you reach the back end of each track. And then, of course, the second side of this record is titled The Ninth Wave, where she kind of ventures into a little bit of a mini kind of concept album on this second half, really kind of making this album feel almost like a double album of sorts, yet packed in under an hour. This thing is beautiful. This is the first Kate Bush album I heard, and it still leaves me in a sense of awe and wonder at just how gorgeous the textures are on this thing. Again, her voice here, her performance, her instrumentals, everything about this record just feel so overwhelmingly gorgeous. And I didn't even address the elephant in the room, which is the opening track here, Running Up That Hill, A Deal with God, which is even more, current today than it was upon release, as it has seen such a massive resurgence in recent years, as it should, because again, this opening track really just shows the scope of the record that continues to grow as you listen to the album. It is just a gorgeous record that is perfect. It is her best work, is essentially what I'm saying. And with that being said, I know some people might think, well, I like The Dreaming more, and while I can respect it, The Dreaming to me is the ugly stepsister. Now, that's not an insult. It's just that The Dreaming is harder to digest, whereas Hounds of Love does what I think many great records typically do, which is blending the accessibility with the experimental. And to me, when it comes to making a great album, that is the key cross-section you need. You look at any, influential, important record, typically they are as accessible as they are groundbreaking. Moving on, we've got The Sensual World. Now, a hot take. A lot of people love The Sensual World. A lot of people would say The Sensual World is in her top 3. I've seen a lot of people put this up as part of the trilogy of The Dreaming, Hounds of Love, and then, of course, The Sensual World. Now, for me, that kicks off with Never Forever, The Dreaming, and then Hounds of Love, where that, to me, is like the core trilogy of Kate Bush's discography. The Sensual World, though, subtle, beautiful, a gorgeous LP in subtlety, but I do find it to be a step down from Hounds of Love and The Dreaming and Never Forever. This is a record that, although has some gorgeous tracks, the title track especially is quite beautiful. I do find this is a record that I just don't really ever feel the need to go back to be quite honest with you. As subtle as it is, I do find it does get a little bland and is not as interesting to me, both vocally and songwriting-wise, as some of her other works. She explores subtlety on some of her later albums a lot more, and in my opinion, to a greater, more unique extent. And for that, it does kind of bump this record down a little bit in my personal ranking. You do have tracks like Deeper Understanding, which is super ahead of its time and a gorgeous track, and quite possibly my favorite on here. I also have This Woman's Work, which is really just a heartbreaking, emotive, beautiful track as well. But all in all, I do find The Sensual World to be a little, don't hate me for this, a little bland. So with that being said, it's certainly one of the lower ranking albums for me, and that is going to be, I think, my most hot take of the video. I do feel like everybody has their hot takes and their unpopular opinions when it comes to not just Kate Bush, but any artist. And certainly doing a deep discog dive, you're gonna find some of those. Well, for this video, my hot take is that The Sensual World is a tad overrated, and although still a very impressive record in its own way, and certainly a nice exploration into subtlety, it's not her best work, at least in my opinion. So I'm going to put this above Lionheart. I like it more than Lionheart, but I don't like it as much as the other albums up here. It's going to be a solid B tier. If I were to give this a rating, if you are someone that cares for that, then I would give The Sensual World like a 7 out of 10. I wouldn't even go to an 8, though. I would not go to quite that high, personally. The Red Shoes. Following The Sensual World, The Red Shoes came out, and this record, does show Kate Bush kind of settling into a sound. I would say this is not as unique of a record as anything else she has made. It does feel a little bit more run-of-the-mill. Her contemporaries at the time and other artists in the 90s were pushing the boundaries in a way that I feel like had, at this point, kind of outpaced that of Kate Bush. And while she is, still a great musician, and this album to me is still better than most musicians' work, this is an album that is, again, to most people's standards, one of her weakest LPs. Now, in some ways, I prefer this over The Sensual World. In some ways, I do think this is a bit more enjoyable just on a sonic and pure accessibility level than that of A Sensual World. I think tracks like Eat the Music, although a lot of people for some reason don't like that track, I think Eat the Music is one of my favorite tracks of Kate Bush's, post Hounds of Love, which might be a huge, bold claim, but I really like the kind of, island-like sound that she kind of embraces on that one. And it does feel a little bit more unique in terms of venturing into a different territory. I also really like the tracks Rubber Band Girl, Lily, and I think maybe my favorite track on here is Song of Solomon. Something about that one just kind of rings in the ear for me, and every time it comes on, I typically listen to it front to back, straight through, because it is just such a, impeccable track to me. The Sensual World and The Red Shoes are two albums that I often kind of go back to and debate. To me, they're on the same level, and whether or not I like one more than the other is kind of hard. It really depends on the day, depends how I'm feeling at the time. It is rare that I put this album under the Sensual World, because I do think it is a smidge better. So we're going to put it right here. Also a solid 7 out of 10 record in my eyes. Move the Sensual World over. Lionheart sitting right there. Kate Bush then took a break for about a decade or so. I think it was around 12 years before she came back with Ariel, a double LP, a massive album, and her best work, I would say, post Hounds of Love. In terms of her second half of the discography, this is the album where I feel like she really kind of reached a creative peak, a creative height that is just so massive. You got the first side, A Sea of Honey, which is already a pretty strong record. A Sea of Honey has a plethora of great tracks. Birdie, Pie, King of the Mountain as well, kicking off the LP. I gotta say, Sea of Honey, that first half has some of her best songwriting, period. In her entire discography, some of her greatest songwriting lands on the first half of this LP. But as great as side one is, as great as A Sea of Honey is as its own album, you get to side two, A Sky of Honey. And even though this is broken up into multiple tracks, it is kind of in its own way a singular 42-minute epic, which for any artist, 42 minutes for one track is a lot to ask for. But if you can, get through that 42 minutes and enjoy it, I'm telling you now, Sky of Honey is one of the greatest listening experiences I've had in some time. I gotta say, the entire Sky of Honey side is perfect. I would not change a single thing about it. Even when she had to re-record some of these parts due to the fact that there was some unforeseen circumstances on the original, the re-recordings to me still feel, just as powerful as the originals. And really, Sky of Honey is pretty much a perfect kind of concept tackled in whole, kind of chronicling what seems to be the entirety of a day in what seems to be, again, an artist's life. Some really unique production techniques as well used on Sky of Honey. I like the kind of bird chirps, which you can hear reciting the phrase Sky of Honey, kind of muffled out to kind of further imply that it's a bird chirp, but also reciting the title of the track. So Ariel, this thing, if side one of this is like a solid 9 out of 10, then side B, Sky of Honey, to me is like a perfect 10 out of 10. I really do think Ariel, massive, huge album, and not one that I really listen to too much in one sitting. I typically pick one side or the other. But whenever I do hear Sky of Honey start, assuming I'm not too busy, as soon as it comes on, I'm listening to that full 42 minutes, baby. Ariel, beautiful. And we're going to throw that up here, and we're going to say that's going right. I'm tempted to put this even above The Dreaming. That's how good it is. But due to the fact that that might be seen as blasphemous, and due to the fact that The Dreaming is certainly easier to digest in one sitting, I'm going to go ahead and put Ariel right here. I think the only thing holding back Ariel is the fact that it is such a mammoth of a record when you take it in as a full double album. Whereas if you split it up, if this was just Sky of Honey, it would be, kind of easier to kind of differentiate. But Ariel, S tier for sure. Let's go into Director's Cut, which I covered on the channel. simply because this is kind of listed as one of her many studio albums. I didn't cover live albums or anything like that. I didn't cover outtakes on the channel, but I did want to cover every major studio work and director's cut. Although it is just kind of her redoing a lot of her tracks from the past, it is still unique in its own way and its own kind of core album, I would say. Again, taking tracks from the Red Shoes and tracks from the Sensual World and kind of redoing them in her own modern, 2010 kind of way. I think it actually came out 2011, same year as Ariel. It's really hard to listen to this record and not compare it to the original tracks. But if you can listen to these tracks as if they were their own unique pieces of music, not trying to compare them at all, then some of these tracks do stand out as being quite unique, quite powerful, and in some ways better than the originals. But they do go for their own kind of visions and ideas. Some of them go a much more slower route, a more kind of subtle route, while others feel a little bit more bold creatively, such as Deeper Understanding, which I've said many times over. Deeper Understanding, Sensual World, my favorite track possibly, beautiful, ahead of its time. Director's cut comes along, takes Deeper Understanding, adds this really weird, disturbed, robotic voice in the chorus that adds a sense of kind of cold, almost like dystopian-like nature to it. I feel like Deeper Understanding on Sensual World is much more heartwarming and kind of beautiful in its own way, whereas on Director's Cut, Deeper Understanding feels kind of disturbed and eerie and ahead of its time. I feel like in this day and age where we're talking about AI and stuff like that, Deeper Understanding does feel like it is kind of foreshadowing stuff that is to come. And I feel like over time, people will go back to Deeper Understanding from this one and give it more praise, more recognition, and possibly people will recognize it for, I would say, the ahead of a time genius that track is. But that being said, this album as a whole doesn't always stick the landing. A lot of the cuts on here, in comparison to their original or even in their own rights, just aren't as, unique or as impressive as some of the other cuts here. I would say that, about half this album sticks the landing. I think This Woman's Work as well is handled quite beautifully with a sense of subtlety on this one and much more slower, much more somber, which is already saying a lot considering the emotion in the original is pretty palpable. But on this one, it is much more quiet and careful and delicate in its delivery. So again, a little bit more ambient. Whether or not you like that is really a matter of personal preference. But again, other than This Woman's Work and Deeper Understanding, which to me are the key standout tracks, possibly outdoing the originals or at least standing in their own kind of way, this album is maybe her weakest. So we're going to put it right here. Again, it's a solid record. I think it has some great ideas on it. I might even put it just ever so slightly lower. It's like a 5 out of 10, at most a 6, because, again, this isn't one I go back to that often. There are some good tracks on here, but it is also kind of hard to justify listening to some of these tracks over the originals. So there you have it. But let's go into her final LP, 50 Words for Snow. You want to talk about delicate. Director's Cut, like I said, had This Woman's Work, a very delicate, gorgeous rendition of it. 50 Words for Snow takes the concept of subtlety, the concept of careful, sort of plodding instrumentals that feel quite cold and kind of somber and ever growing as they go, and pushes it to the forefront. 50 Words for Snow is some of her best songwriting. The track Lake Tahoe, I believe it's pronounced, is, again, kind of starts things off with this kind of haunting, disturbed sort of instrumental, as well as lyrics kind of pertaining to a ghost, a spirit coming out of a lake. And you can't help but feel like this track might be a little eerie, a little disturbed, but as it goes on, it gets much more soft, beautiful, and delicate as the ghost finds herself back with her dog, who has been waiting for her, it would seem, in the life, waiting for the owner to return. And this kind of reunion is quite beautiful and takes the track into a much more interesting direction than just a simple ghost story. And the album as a whole, I would say, kind of handles the concept of kind of loving the weird and loving the disturbed in a sense, such as the track Misty, where we see Kate Bush build a snowman and have what seems to be sexual intercourse with it. Again, Kate Bush, weird as ever, but there's a sense of beauty and kind of honesty that really does kind of come through the music here, and you can't help but feel a sense of empathy in the track. This is a really beautiful, sweet album overall, and there's not a single track here that is shorter than, I think, 7 minutes, meaning that they really do take their time. Again, a very delicate album overall, and even a feature of Mr. Elton John on this one. And while that track is not necessarily my favorite, it is kind of chronicling the continual kind of love story between these kind of soul-tied people generations back. Again, the Elton John and Kate Bush sort of contrast works wonderfully, I would say, and does kind of continue to deliver on themes of kind of love and connection that this album kind of wraps all together. I feel like every track on here kind of handles the concept of a personal and unique kind of connection, whether it be a snowman, a dog, this, long lost love, or even a Yeti on one of the tracks. So very weird, but again, in Kate Bush's own way, she takes the weird, she makes it enjoyable, she makes it very human, and makes it ever so powerful. And the slowness of this record, the delicate nature of it, to me, really works wonders. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I personally think it's quite underrated. And with that, we're going to take this last record of Miss Kate Bush's, and we're going to actually put it right here, right in the A tier, just under the Kick Inside above the Red Shoes. So that does it for tiering them all out. So again, let's just quickly recap to close out the video. Here are the top 10 Kate Bush albums, all 10 of her studio albums ranked by me, yours truly, coming in at 10th place, last place. Again, a solid record still in its own right, but a solid 5 out of 10, just with some great ideas kind of throughout. That is the remake album, The Director's Cut, coming at 10th. 9th place is Lionheart, which is essentially Kick Inside's B-sides. Then we get to 8th place, The Sensual World. My hot take for the video, I apologize to the Sensual World fans. No justice here, unfortunately. 7th place, The Red Shoes. Next, we've got the solid 9 out of 10 records, the 8 out of 10 records. That's going to be coming in at 6th place, 50 Words for Snow, her last project. Coming in at 5th place, we've got The Kick Inside, her debut, an incredible, impeccable, beautiful debut it is. Then 4th place, we've got Never Forever. 3rd place, we've got Ariel, her best album in the second half of her discography and post Hounds of Love. 2nd place, we've got The Dreaming, innovative, groundbreaking, beautiful, while also very, very ugly and disturbed, I would say. And at the number 1 place, her best album, one of the best albums of not just the 80s, but perhaps all time, super ahead of its time. That is, of course, Hounds of Love. Gorgeous record, and really does show Kate Bush reaching a creative and accessible peak, a great cross-section that really makes this record stand the tests of time. So that does it for the ranking. It has been a journey with you guys. It has been fun listening to every Kate Bush album, and it has been fun tearing them out and thinking about all these albums critically in their own way up against one another. And with that, I've really just enjoyed this entire Kate Bush project we've done on the channel. But all good things must come to an end. So with that, we are done with Kate Bush on the channel for, a good chunk of time. I'm not going to say forever. I do have some ideas still kicking around about Kate Bush that I maybe thought about doing a separate video for, another video for one day, but maybe that'll just be a surprise for when or if that even happens. So next, we're going to cover Pink Floyd, Bjork, like I've been saying. I know I say it in every video, but it is happening. It's coming. If you like Bjork, if you like Pink Floyd, they're getting full Discog deep dives as well, just like Miss Kate Bush did here on the channel. Again, one last thank you to the Kate Bush fans. Thank you for watching. As always, my name is Randy Joe. I appreciate you watching, and I'm signing off.